Hi, and welcome to a new episode of the Qulture Qanvas podcast. We're back with Sania and Riaz.
Hey.
Hi.
I think the first episode were kind of warm up, right? And now we're getting into it finally. This week we've got a bunch of topics. And as usual, the podcast is basically to educate, illuminate, and also kind of bridge the gap with market research, which kind of can be an industry that not people know a lot about or are just not interested in, as we heard from a very great conversation we had yesterday. And also, we're building Qulture Qanvas as a market research agency focused on diversity. And I want you to, join our journey. That's kind of the fun part. Yeah, I think let's get into the first one, maybe. The big battle that always happens is Quant versus Qual. And is it still a battle? I think I want to ask you, Riaz, is it still a battle? Are you're obviously the Qual guy, I'm the Quant guy. Do we fight it out? Do we duke it out still, or is there brotherly love?
I'm in the middle. I'm like the peacemaker.
Poor Sanya.
Yeah, probably within our dynamic as well, right? They complement each other, as we sort of talked about before, right? And it's knowing when to use the right methodology. But I think also, people can steer towards one methodology, especially if they're used to it within the organization, and not maybe look to try other methodologies. So you can become very reliant on quant data, right? And then through that quant data, it can get very skewed because you're not picking up nuances, little cultural insights, and that big data can really kind of cloud things. So, that's not to talk down on quant, because quant has great value. You can reach a community very quickly, large numbers, but on the qual side, it's just kind of picking up those little subtle nuances, really getting deep dive into the, into those things. So yeah, I think they complement, but you also need to understand what the scope of the project is and, what methodology fits best.
Sanya, you're the unbiased person here, right? So when you are getting a brief, when you're talking to a client, how do you guide them? What are your factors in your head? This needs to be Qual, this needs to be Quant, or is it a combination, which usually seems to be the case now, right?
Yeah, I think when I first started in research, so 10, 15 years ago now, there was a very strong divide. I think because research was largely offline as well. So it was like you're either in the Qual camp or you're in the Quant camp. And there was, at one point I was like, oh, do I need to pick one as well? Where is the money? Where is, it felt quite separate. But now I think, especially with digital technologies and companies I've worked at in the past, it feels very much more mixed method. And I think that's how research should be. I think it's at its most powerful when it's mixed. And now with the rise of big data, we're seeing a lot of my music clients have so much streaming data, but they're like, hold on, we need some primary data behind that. So let's do a survey and then let's do some qual research as well. So I think they're very much coming hand in hand now, which is great.
And I think it's also interesting because we were talking to a client this week about should Quant come first or should Qual come first, right? And I thought that was quite a very, always whenever we're having these discussions with our client, my brain is always working on three other things that we can kind of get into. And I just thought it was such an interesting conversation that, when should Qual come in and when should Quant come in?
And that's where our roles become very important, right? Because through that conversation, we quickly learned they weren't sure themselves. Right? Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. That's what we're here for.
That's what I love, actually. That's what I love, where you can create a true partnership with your clients and kind of have those conversations like maybe we should module it this way or that way. I kind of really appreciate those relationships with the client that are more, kind of closer partnerships.
Yeah, I think so. Something distinctly in my mind when I was doing the Market Research Society certificate, and I remember I was writing this proposal, like a mock proposal, and it was like, what are the benefits of quant? And it was like survey data. And then my colleague, she was brilliant. She was like, no, but what is it actually doing? What is quant giving you? And she made me think broader. And I was like, hold on, it's helping you see what's going on at a broader panoramic level, and then Qual enables you to then drill down. Once you've identified maybe core audiences or core segments, you can then get to know them a lot better. So that really helped to humanize research. And I love writing methodology, but I love writing methodology in a way that is that more human side of research is not so technical that you feel really intimidated or overwhelmed. So I'm hoping we can get that across to, I don't know, entrepreneurs, small businesses as well, that want to kind of not feel scared of it?
Yeah. I think also one of the factors with either Qual or Quant seems to be cost related to it, right? Again, we had this conversation recently about, what is the cost of market research? And it seems to be a lot of people just don't know how much it will cost you. And we always have a few cheeky clients that will be like, they want everything. And then when the budget comes through, you're like, okay, let's tone it down a little, right? So I don't know. If you have a very cost-driven client, where would you kind of guide them to? Quant, Qual, what are your kind of insights here?
That's a good question. Even though they may be cost conscious, still kind of have to have that understanding of a ballpark budget, right? It's really important, because otherwise we're just going to go round and round in circles trying to work out what we can do. So once we have that kind of idea of budget, I think then we can kind of roll backwards and understand the best methodology. But I think with all budgets, you have options for both, right?
Yeah.
I guess the key thing is really understanding what the objectives are and what the key deliverables are, and then from that we can kind of work it all out. But even with a minuscule budget, just understanding those key deliverables will be super helpful.
Yeah, I think also what I've noticed is that you need to have internal buy-in in the company to even do research. And for that, you need the key stakeholders to understand the point of market research. And I think that's sometimes even a battle that on the client side is not won yet, is not really decided yet. So you almost need to help your point person to kind of have the arguments, have the kind of KPI set and what the point of all of this would be, right? So it seems to be kind of a back and forth between budget and trust to me. Like, how much do they trust you and how much do they trust market research as a whole?
Yeah, we'd have this sometimes where they'd say, like, when you put a quote, like a qualitative quote, whether it's from an open end in a survey, but that just brings the research to life a lot sometimes. And I think if you need some buy-in, sometimes doing some qual to help, again, people understand, empathize. It's like, why do people love documentaries so much? They bring you into people's lives, which maybe some quals or some depth interviews could really help, especially if you're a small business. Like, go and have a conversation with some of your clients. It doesn't have to be very technical, but it will give you a lot of insight. Even if you're seeing the sales data or you're seeing your social media data, those conversations can give you so much richness. So I think where I would start is, how much do you already know about the target audience? If you know nothing at all, then maybe some qualitative research is the best place to start. You're sort of dipping your toe in the water. If you're ready and you need to kind of market size and, really think about competitors and stuff, then maybe Quant is the place to start.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Especially what stage you are in your own business as well.
Yeah. When is the point that a company should do research, right? Is it too early? Because especially when you're building something up, it is a cost. Like, it will cost something. And would you already start at the phase of the concept of the business itself? Are you doing it when the product is kind of ready? I think for me, it needs to be at every stage in one way or the other. But I think you need to find the way that would work best for you, in terms of, the market that you're speaking with, or, the budget that you can spend on it. And I think the advantage now is also that we have so many cost-effective tools too, Qual can be done online, Quant can be done very quickly, which maybe wasn't available before back in the day.
Definitely. That's the beauty of research, as you said, right? You can literally do it at every stage, whether it be a service, product design, package design, a new advert release, testing market. It's just that's great.
I agree. I think it should be at every stage, and I always train on this, that it's cyclical, like we said, thinking about your concept and other stuff. But you're right that the amount you invest in it might differ at different points. I was actually working on an app for a while, and obviously I'm there telling everyone they should do research, and I was like, oh my god, I do not have the budget to do any research. But I did some smaller stuff. So you do your UX reviewing the app. So I had some friends and family. I was obviously always thinking about the sample and making sure it wasn't skewed. But you can do that early, or like when I was testing the logo for my company, I literally had 2-3 of my cousins' children look at it, and they were like, oh, we really like the colors on this, we like that, and it was really helpful. And obviously I'm not trying to talk us out of getting paid work, but I do think that you can apply it. You don't want to be scared, because sometimes we think, oh, other people's opinions will sway us. That's why, if you're just aware of the types of people you're asking, have you got a broad enough perspective? If it's your friends and family, do they have an agenda? Just think a little bit about that, and then I think it makes research something that you can apply more in day-to-day life.
I think at least when you're, dealing with like an Asian family or an Asian network, you're going to get a very honest opinion. There's no filter whatsoever.
There's no two-way mirrors needed for that.
Nobody's going to make you feel good.
Yeah, it's all. Yeah, true.
But what are some of the pushbacks you get from clients in terms of doing research, just generally? Like, is there anything that kind of stands out? Because I think you're in that phase where your clients aren't sure, right? Do they even need it? Do they not need it? And you kind of guide them more.
I think it's often, we're already seeing sales. They've never really done it before, and it's kind of just an assumption that those sales will continue. I would say that's for maybe brands that are already basically winning within the diverse audiences. Those brands that are looking to attract them, I think some of the hesitation is, how do we do it right? They also want to get it really perfect sometimes, and they want to think about all the potential intersections, and they want to make it, I suppose, technically and politically very correct. But that can come with its own challenges. So it's just guiding them to be like, right, here's a starting point, and you can keep iterating. I think sometimes, of course, when it comes to diverse audiences, the work I do often, there is sometimes a hesitance further to that. I don't know, is the money there from the audience? Will they get value for money from it? That kind of stuff is also.
Do you think there's also an element of a pre-existing idea of how things should be? And that's quite challenging to kind of take on.
Preconceived notions.
Yeah, preconceived notions.
Yeah. I think it's close to that idea of, especially a lot of brands and companies are very kind of owner-based, right? The person that owns the company or started the company, the founder, he's basically driving the business, right? And a lot of it is based on their gut feelings. So if you are support staff, it's very hard to kind of go against that. And, it's almost like implanting a little bit of doubt, where almost there's this idea there should be no doubt. This is a clear focus, and this is the way we were doing things. So I don't know. I don't think it should be doubt. It's more about supporting the kind of vision of the company.
Well, I think that if people knew how much these big companies, whether it's chocolates, whether big brands spend on research, all of these companies have massive research and insight teams. And that's something I'm often flagging to people. If you want to go and work in music, well, you can work in insights at Spotify. So insights inform absolutely everything. But I think there are certain brands, like we said, maybe in diverse brands who, like you said, it is gut feel. It feels like, do you really need it? Are you questioning yourself? But I think maybe actually if we can get across the fact that so many brands are doing it, it will help them in their business strategy more.
I have a clear example of this actually a couple of years ago. I was working with this Muslim brand based in the Emirates, and they wanted to launch a halal line of Belgian chocolates in Dubai. But they did no research whatsoever. They didn't understand the production methods in Belgium and why Belgian chocolates is, it has that point of origin thing when, like champagne in France, like if you're producing it in a certain way, then you can call it champagne. It's the same thing with Belgian chocolate. You have to produce it in a certain way. And they didn't understand that. And then also just the cultural differences between, having food that's halal, chocolate that's halal, that can be imported in a certain way. I think they invested at least 2.5 years into that business until they just basically disbanded it because it was not going anywhere. They didn't do any research. And I remember the first call I had with them was when they were starting the ideas. And I was like, okay, we need to do some research here. But maybe it was that idea that, he's a researcher, so all he can think
Yeah.
about is research. But I think that was a key factor why they couldn't get the business really established.
And it boggles me when you think like you're going to do something so big, right?
Yeah.
That you're not going to do just a small amount of research, even if it's desk research,
Yeah.
just to kind of understand.
They had samples made of chocolate, and I'm saying like 200 pieces of chocolate, and 70% contained alcohol.
Wow. Yeah.
Wait for the halal chocolate.
For the halal chocolate, and they just hadn't figured out that you need to give clear indication on how you import it into market. They hadn't done any of that. I mean, for me, this is one of those horror stories of clients that are like, and that wasn't even a client. I didn't even get paid for this. This was like a favor, right? But like, it's one of those stories that I always kind of come back to, like one of the worst situations in my career. And I was just kind of like thinking, are there any kind of horror stories that you have, terrible clients or terrible studies that you worked on? Obviously, we're not gonna name names. We're not gonna put anybody in danger here. Nobody wants to get sued. But is there any kind of case studies that you had, Sania, that you can think of?
Well, firstly, this is a revelation. I didn't know. Are Belgian chocolates not halal in that case?
Check the labels.
Okay.
The ones I bring for you, I'll
Okay, fine. Okay. So yeah, there have been when I train a lot on this, there's a few things that just keep happening. That happened a lot last year. All the years before, but a few ads come up, and then because these days there's so many diversity influencers and stuff on social media, on LinkedIn. If you do something wrong, it will be going viral on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So one thing was obviously Kendall Jenner in the Pepsi advert, which really did not go well.
I remember that.
Which was awful. It was like around like the Black Lives Matter movement, and it was like everyone drinking Pepsi and being like, oh, everything's fine. They got so much negative feedback, and you just think if you had just tested that ad, you wouldn't have had like Kendall crying on the Kardashians. It wouldn't have been such a PR disaster for a brand. So there are a lot of examples like that I see.
Yes, do you know which one Kendall is?
Yeah, I do.
Because I don't.
It took me a little while, but yeah.
I thought there was a Stephanie Kardashian for a long time, and somebody told me there's not. I didn't know.
Is she one of the friends?
I don't know. I was like, isn't there a blonde one?
Chloe.
Yeah.
They do
Sanya always
research.
keeps us up to date with
Guys,
the hot
let me
takes.
say, the Kardashians do research.
Of course they do.
Literally, like when I saw Kim, and this was we should B-roll to this. Kim is like watching, going. The focus groups have said that we should do this in the episode. Or oh no, the episode didn't test very well. So that's super interesting.
I'm 100% sure they have to do. I mean, you cannot be such a successful brand if you're not doing any research.
Yeah.
Any stories that you have, Riaz, that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, going back to a point about stakeholders and sort of top level as well. So we did this project, and it was for a FMCG company, and unfortunately, the CEO hadn't ever really bought into research, and it transpired a bit later on in the project that he didn't want to do market research. And although he had a research department, which was very small, they were working with another agency, and we were brought on as a fieldwork provider for the project. We done a fantastic job. We recruited. Half the groups were done, and all of a sudden, the CEO got involved. And unfortunately, it happens. There was a couple of bad respondents, and it just so happened to be that the CEO was watching that particular group, even though we had done like 6 or 7 prior to that, and they all went well. And he just pulled the plug.
Right.
And, it was just like, there was so much great insight already done, but such a waste of money, such a waste of insight. Yeah. And you think, even if you wanted to pull the project, why wouldn't you just use the data and the insights that you have, right?
I want to build on that. I think I always used to say to my teams, I think when you're in research, I'm constantly in this state of anxiety to the point where I don't even know why I do this to myself. So much stress. But the reason it is not cheap is because we have outgoings where we have to pay the people who've taken part in research, because without them, we don't have an industry. So we have to respect them and the sample. But I feel like, sometimes people maybe there's a tendency to think, oh, we're smarter than the general public. What do they know? And everyone's always looking to pick holes, sadly, in research and be like, oh, well, So I don't know. It just feels like they maybe don't understand. Sorry, I'm going off on one here. But I think firstly why we can't just do something super cheaply, because there are people behind it that we have to pay and honor. And then, like sometimes one person might have said the wrong thing and it's just an easy excuse for someone to be like, oh, well, see, it's not worth it.
I actually have that a lot, because on the online side of things, the way the pricing works is how difficult is the target to find, right? And a lot of times I find that clients just think, because they're living in that world, they just think their brand is huge, everybody knows this and stuff like that. But when you go into the actual market, people either don't know their brand or they don't care about their brand. And that can be, you can kind of get a reality check at that time. And that's not a nice check to deliver to your client. And that's happened quite a few times. One story that I do have was one part of our business is that we build up panels and communities for our client, online panels with media acquisition. And this was happening around 2016, 2017. I don't know if you remember those elections and those election cycles, but there was a lot of digital hacking and click farms going around. And we were basically guiding a client on how to build their panel. I suggested that you need to put some security measures in. We can either put an API security setup, have some digital fingerprints, or just some simple, triple opt-in, or, like a phone code or something like that. They decided not to do that at all, not even a geo-check, nothing like that in the sign-up process. And their link got picked up by one of these click farms, and within 24 hours, they had around 50,000 people sign up.
Wow.
That got through every security measure. They didn't have many security measures, but the link got picked up. All of the data was wrong. And then you just have to kind of go back and sort it. And the problem is with these guys is
it's your fault.
Of course it's my fault, yeah. But the thing is that these guys are so much smarter than we are. And we as an industry, and this is the thing that I constantly harp on about, is that we are very conservative as an industry, so we don't catch up on what the world is really doing. And that hurts us in these even technical ways. We did sort it out at the end. It was basically 3-4 suppliers that the link had been passed on, and then some bot had kind of, caught it. But in 2016, it was, I didn't know about all of these things, right? It was quite new, and it was a mess. Like, it was election fraud, and all of these things were happening. Servers were crashing at that time. We had a massive AWS crash. I still get nightmares about that one. Like, that was like a really, really bad one. But yeah, the client came back. We're still working with them. So,
well, that there are conversations now about why polling around elections is so iffy, and could that be something to do with the sample? We know roughly, for example, diverse audiences are maybe 20-30% of the population. So if they're not reflected in your sample, and they can often vote quite differently, then that will impact polls. So that is, I think, hopefully helping to raise this issue and hopefully rectify it. Yeah.
I want to kind of move on to a second topic slightly. We're an agency that focuses on diversity and difficult to reach audiences, although that's not the only thing we do. But there's been DEI cuts across the board. Pretty much every company, I think except Apple kind of they announced that they were cutting DEI and funds, and then they said, no, we're not going to do it. But pretty much Google, Meta, everybody, either they're cutting budget or the targets that they had set up, they're basically forgetting about them, right? And I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts about that. Sanya, what do you think about it? What's kind of the situation in your...
So, I think there was a lot of movement. January hit and there was a lot of announcing this, announcing that. I feel like now that President Trump's come in and been in for a while, we're getting a sense of what's going on, where we're seeing where things are being rolled back, where companies are standing up. I think it's starting to settle a little bit more. But actually, I was very inspired by some... I'm part of the UN Women's delegation for this... in March, kind of this commission on the status of women. And they said something really inspiring, which was actually, it's when we face backlash that we work harder to create change. So all in all, I'm starting to feel a lot more positive. I've also seen some positive Ramadan campaigns, like Sainsbury's have done one, this whole samosa campaign, which was really
I
cool.
love that samosa campaign,
Yeah, so, and then various other things around Ramadan that have given me a bit more hope that I think it will be, will continue as we are for a while, because there's money in it as well for brands, in audiences. So I feel like we're in a slightly different phase than maybe we were. I'm not saying it's not going to go back. Something just feels a bit more peaceful. Maybe it is Ramadan. I don't know.
I think you're peaceful.
I'm in Ramadan.
I think
Yeah,
you're in a
I'm peaceful.
Because I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do you think?
I think now the dust has settled a little bit. We are seeing some positivity through that. But a lot of the big companies, unfortunately, I think have used it, as an excuse to cut back on D&I. And, that's a real concern, right? Because, as you said rightly, Sanya, there's so much more richness away from financial gains, to D&I, right?
I think, I mean, I've said this to you guys offline a few times, but it's the ones that were already unconvinced of DAI, they just have an excuse to basically cut their budgets. Those people were never your allies. They were never going to buy in anyway, and no sense of argument was going to sway them. But it's now it's in a way, it's clear who is on your side and who isn't. Like, I think the people, it's not going to go away. Diversity, inclusion, it's not going to go away, and it makes everything stronger and better. Be it a country, be it a company, be it your community, be it your friend group, having diversity, different voices, different opinions makes it better and stronger. So I think now is the time for the people that are allies to speak up, to kind of, basically put their money where their mouth is. And I think that's what's really, really needed, especially when you have such a backlash about this narrative that has changed in these last few months. I just kind of think it's kind of like a filtration process. And I kind of, for me, it excites me. It doesn't scare me at all. I think a lot of people are nervous. I am not, but maybe that's just my personality, that whenever there's adversity, I just go harder at it.
So it's almost like the dilution of people just doing things for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
So who really remains are going to be stronger for it.
And maybe a reset was needed also, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a reset was needed because maybe the movement was kind of going into spaces that it wasn't necessarily needed, or there was a bit of money being spent that wasn't used in the right way. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, this is where I think people's voices and views and stuff I find really interesting. I've had like lots of interesting conversations with Uber drivers or people in different viewpoints. And you're right, I think maybe parts of the movement needed to be refined. The work I do around inclusivity is very much linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which aren't going anywhere. They're around like gender equality and reducing marginalization through data and understanding people. And I think once we cut through the noise, that helps, A. And B, the money factor. I speak a lot about music. And the fact is that music industry growth is being driven by global markets because it's saturating. Streaming is saturating in Western markets. So they need global audiences. And that is driving change. And I think that for me is great because it will sustain.
Yeah. I don't think it's going away anywhere. I mean, they can shout about it as much as they want. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. So, so yeah. I think this is it for this episode. And unless you guys had any hot topics that you still wanted to talk about?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Yeah. No.
Great. I think this was a good one. As usual, drop us an email at hello@qultureqanvas.com if you have any, questions or any topic that you want us to discuss on one of the next episodes. And also just want to thank everybody that has listened to the first episodes and kind of given us a shout out, kind of reposted on LinkedIn. We really appreciate it. But yeah, I think this is it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.
Thanks.
Thank you.